to steal your lunch?
The ground squirrel.
Definitely.
David, is it like
Take my lunch.
one of the sites? The other day I saw one of the sites that you can find those plant organisms and the kind of like the trilobites or kind of animals of the Cambrian are found in a site in Australia, right? South Australia.
So the Ediacaran comes from the Ediacaran Hills in South Australia. They also have stromatolites at Shark Bay that represent single-celled life that's much, much older. Australia has a lot of fantastic fossils. In terms of finding Burgess shale type soft-bodied sites in the world, there are 30 in Canada's national parks, 30. 27 of them are secret because we can't run security for 30 sites.
Yeah.
But most of them are minor, right? Like not that important. There's a site in Shangjiang, I mentioned, in China, in Qingjiang, in Hubei province, interestingly enough, right near Wuhan in China. There's a site in Western Greenland called Sirius Passet. There's a site in Namibia and a site in Utah. And there might be a couple more that I've forgotten or haven't mentioned.
And probably like it's like there is a high possibility that there are much more sites than this one, but still without discover, right?
Absolutely. Think how improbable this is. Let's go through what happened here, okay? So the fossils, we're going to get there in 1 second. At the end of the Ediacaran time, we have this massive ice age where the ice comes right down to the equator. It's called snowball Earth. The whole Earth turns into a snowball. And oxygen plummets, carbon dioxide plummets, all sorts of things happen. When the ice melts, the oceans are saturated. They're full of calcite. I see all these mountains you see here around us. They're all made of limestone. Every rock you see is limestone. Limestone is made of calcite. Calcite is also water soluble, like it dissolves in water. Many scientists believe it was this great extinction event that wiped out Ediacara, that really set the stage for what we call the Cambrian explosion. Cambrian explosion is a paleontological, geological word that refers to the fact that we go from very low diversity, rather simple organisms in about 545 to incredibly complex, sophisticated, and diverse animals about 5 million years later. And when we're thinking about how evolution works, the ability of organisms to evolve 5 million years is a staggering amount of time for us humans, but in the scale of 500 million years, it's pretty short. And within that very short period of time, you get an incredible explosion of diversity. In addition to the extinction event, there are a number of theories as to why this explosion of evolutionary activity occurs at this time. I think the best explanation that we've come up with so far is the evolution of the behavior of predation. If you look at Cambrian animals, they have eyes. Nothing before this had eyes. Sure, photosynthetic organisms have light-sensitive spots so they can move into the sun or move out of the sun. But look at this guy, 5 eyes. Our friend Olenoides trilobite has very sophisticated eyes. Our friend Anomalocaris has very good eyes as well. Eyes, it turns out, are very, very expensive, both in terms of growing from a juvenile to an adult, but also in terms of evolution. Eyes are so expensive that unless they provide an immediate positive feedback to you, they're of no use. Now imagine our guy here from 10 million years beforehand. He's just sitting around. He's attached to the ground. He's waiting for someone to shove a cheeseburger through his shoulder. What does he need eyes for? He does not. But the evolution of the behavior of one guy eating another guy set off an arms race where spines, shells, even legs become critically important. You can either track down prey or you can get away from it. You can see prey coming. These guys have a shell on the top because their predators are coming from the top. Why this guy had 5 eyes, we do not know. But still, look at that nozzle on the front. Very, very sophisticated animals. But it's believed now that that whole concept of one group of animals eating another set up an evolutionary explosion. These fossils lived at the time along the edge of an escarpment. We're about 200 in the Cambrian time. We're about 200 kilometers from the land. But the water is shallow, the light penetrates right to the bottom, and it's warm and nutrient rich. It's a pretty happy place to live. But eventually all creatures have to die, and they get buried in the mud and the silt and the clay at the bottom. And they become fossilized. Now here's where we get to your question. We are more likely to be struck individually by 5 bolts of lightning this afternoon, and I'm almost positive that's not going to happen, than this should ever have happened. The preservation, the discovery of the Burgess shale is incredibly improbable. Think of all the things that have to line up. First of all, most animals never get fossilized. There was a paper in Nature recently that tried to estimate the number of individual Tyrannosaurus rexes that had ever lived on Earth, right? You guys know what Tyrannosaurus rex is. Big mouth, little arms, terror dinosaur. They lived around 2.5 million years from when they first appear in the fossil record to when they go extinct. So a relatively short period of time. There are 28 partial or complete Tyrannosaurids in the world. 28. Given how popular they are, you would think there was more fossils than 28. Scientists think there were probably on the order of 2 to 5 billion individual tyrannosaurs that lived on Earth cumulatively from when they first appeared to the end. So out of 5 billion, 28 became fossils. So fossilization is an incredibly rare thing. It doesn't happen very often at all. So first of all, it's improbable that our guys are going to get fossilized to begin with. Secondly, because we have soft tissue preservation, it requires a certain set of circumstances. There has to be no oxygen, has to be cold, they have to be rapidly buried in a very fine-grained sediment, and they have to be left alone. And all of those things happen. And once they died and they were buried, sediment continued to accumulate on top of them, up to about 10 kilometers. Now the fact that they were right close to the escarpment, to the edge of the continent, the continental shelf, they literally exist right here. So when all that sediment piled on top of them, they weren't squished and metamorphized and obliterated. They were actually protected a bit by the cliff that they lived next to.
And the size of this fossil could be changed, or this is the normal size of the animal?
This is life size, but we, as you'll see when we get up there, they could be anywhere from 1 centimeter to about 25 centimeters in length, this particular species. But then they have to be buried under all this sediment, turned to rock, remember, Jordan? And then BC crashes into North America about 100 to 30 million years ago and pushes the mountains up in the air. These mountains were originally about twice as tall as they are today. Then they have to be eroded to just the right point. And this is the most improbable thing of all. The ice comes, scrapes it off a bit more. Because once the fossils are exposed to the air, they last for a few hundred years. 500-million-year-old fossils are going to go away by rainwater, by erosion, right? So they have to be exposed at the surface within that 100-year window that any human looking at them would know what they are and would make a big deal out of it. Furthermore, these ones are discovered right next to the highway. That's not a coincidence. So to answer your question, it is incredibly unlikely that these fossils are here. And it suggests, yes, that there are all sorts of things out there waiting to be discovered.
Yeah.
If they were down in a different layer in the mountain, would we find them? No.
But is
They're
this
still
area
buried.
or could be in China, for example?
No, like
The
Could be
same
in
process
everywhere.
in China. They would have lived
Yeah.
anywhere where you have that
Because I
kind
think
of...
that they had that one is because they found something like that.
yeah, but like probably you have more chances to find things like that, like in a mountain range,
You have
maybe?
more chances because
or not.
the rocks are exposed.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
because there's not
Australia
trees.
is not the case. Where they find those
No, but
fossils.
Australia doesn't have a lot of vegetation where these things are found, right? And as long as you have rocks, think about do you know a Mistaken Point in Newfoundland? These are, again, just
Yeah.
rocks.
Yeah,
Namibia has a lot of fossils because they don't have a lot of trees,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So again, it's just serendipity, it's just chance.
Yeah, and the other thing I found amazing is like you say, like in a period of 5 million years, all this diversity and this evolution stages comes to life. Like what if in another site you find something that says another thing, says that probably it's impossible for you find like more connection, more stages of evolution or diversity, and makes you believe after that like it takes more than 5 million years.
It's quite possible. When I started talking about this 28 years ago, I said the Cambrian explosion took 20 to 30 million years.
Hmm. Yeah.
But, and that's the nature of science, right? Some people think that science is just a binary thing. There is a right and a wrong, but it's not. It changes. And whatever I say today is probably a consensus of the best knowledge that we have today. It doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean that in 20 years or 10 years someone else or me is going to be standing here saying something quite different, and that's okay. That's how we learn. That's how we advance science, right?
Yeah.
Because everything is changing. I said that at the beginning, like what I would have talked about 28 years ago today sounds kind of wrong. But it's an always changing process. We always learn new things. We refine our models. We get new evidence, right? What about this new site in Qinjiang in Hubei province in China? Maybe it will tell us a different story. Maybe it will lead us down a different path.
Yeah.
Is the Cambrian explosion real? The best evidence we have right now is that it probably is. But it could be something like a preservational artifact, in the sense that maybe what we see is only because of what we found.
Yeah.
And as soon as you find other things, what you see will change, right?
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, because it's hard to know. I mean, it's hard to to try to comprehend. Like life took probably like more than 500 million years for us to an organism to become smarter, to have intelligence. More than 500 million years. And in 5 million years, you find organism with eyes. Eyes, something that is so like unique. And like it's kind of contradictory. Okay, why it take so much time for an organism to be smart, to be intelligent, and only 5 million years took to create in evolution like eyes, like
Because for most of evolutionary history, not much changes, right? There's not a lot of change going on. It's only following really big changes in the environment, like the end of Snowball Earth or the asteroid impact in the Yucatan, right? If you blow everything up, then you create opportunity for evolution to work. Once all the niches, once the ecosystem is completely filled up with organisms that are perfectly adapted, it's very, very hard for someone else to come in and displace you. So evolution tends to flatline for very long periods of time. Sure, there are minor changes, right? Humans have been evolving for, depends how you define humans, right? But, 4 or 5 million years is probably be a good guess. Modern humans, capable of language and all of that, a few 100,000 years. But paleontologists of the future aren't going to make a lot of distinctions between Australopithecus afarensis and Homo sapiens sapiens. Lucy, who was probably not that smart, and Stephen Hawking, who was a genius.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's also the idea that intelligence, to some extent, is a cultural phenomenon, right? Is a social phenomenon. If you are really smart all by yourself, but you lack language and you lack expression, how do we know? Scientists have always thought, well, up until at least the latter part of the 20th century, that intelligence grew slowly for a very, very long period of time. But the fact is that evolution is two things. It's opportunistic, it will use what's ever available to it, but it's also incredibly parsimonious. It's cheap in a sense that it can't develop things without getting immediate positive feedback. The point is that you don't develop highly sophisticated lenses or eyes that see in 3D, in color, without having a brain to process that information. You can't do it, because the eyes then become useless. Our eyes are useless without our brain. They're just blobs of jelly like grapes, right? So our friend here, Anolonoides, had to have enough processing power to be able to see, to interpret those images, and to act upon them. So intelligence is really, really ancient. I think we, ever since the Victorians, ever since colonialism, have had this idea that animals are dumb and humans are smart. Animals don't have emotions, and humans do. They're trying, and maybe it was the church, I have no idea, but they're trying to separate humans from the rest of the world, or from the rest of the animal kingdom. And modern science says, that's kind of silly. Your dog does miss you. The raven who can figure out how to use tools to unlock ranger stations is pretty bloody smart. He doesn't have that social cultural intelligence yet, where they write things in books and record things on the internet. But I think that we seriously underestimate the intellect of other highly developed organisms. Certainly these creatures had to have enough processing power, had to have enough brains to work their eyes, to coordinate all the complex functions that they did. All we have is the eye. We don't have the brain, right?
And then the other question is, actually today, we have any proof that this animal is not exist in the ocean?
Correct.
It's not exist?
No, it went extinct about 300 million years ago, 250 million years ago.
Yeah, how was called that period? I forgot already. Forgot now. At the end of the Cambrian, it started a new age.
So Cambrian, Ordovician, the trilobites lived Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, and then Permian. And then they're done.
Yeah, I think at the end of the Permian.
Triassic extinction was the biggest extinction event in the history of all time.
And
what do you think's going on here, man?
Air bubbles, maybe.
Maybe. Do you know what it is? Do you remember when I said before that calcite or limestone is water soluble?
No.
This is what you could call microkarsting. It's how you make caves in limestone. It's dissolved out. Would you like it back? You can't take it, you have to leave it here. Okay, I want to do one more thing before we go. Are there any more questions?
Just to remind me, like at the why they got extinct at the end of the Permian, because it was like an oxygenation event or something like that.
People have a lot of theories. Yeah, certainly there's changes in chemistry, there's changes in atmospheric and dissolved oxygen in the oceans, there's changes in a lot of things, but I'm a paleontologist, right? So
Yeah, you are. And if you decide to study this kind of fossils, or you study all the kind of fossils?
I study Cambrian fossils and microfossils from the Permian-Triassic boundary. Because I'm really fascinated by extinction events. Why do they happen? Why do they occur? And particularly what happens afterwards. Because after the Permian-Triassic extinction, this is about 300 million years ago, you get this incredible radiation of lizards, of reptiles, right? And that leads to what, Santiago?
Bees.
Bees. Yeah, probably. Flowering plants and dinosaurs.
Is the big reptiles
But
are basically dinosaurs. Evolved.
There seems to be, at the end of all these extinction events, I don't know how to say it scientifically, the genetics, things get too specialized. Things become less diverse. We all know that at the Cretaceous Tertiary extinction event, that the asteroid wiped them out. But the fact is that animals had become over-specialized, and genetic diversity had been in steep decline prior to the asteroid. So the asteroid is sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back, rather than blowing up a totally healthy evolutionary system. It seems, and not everyone would agree with this, but it seems that what you have is genetics gets tired after a while. We are at the edge of a significant extinction. We're living through an extinction event. Yeah. Some people think that we caused it. I think that's fairly arrogant. We're not that special, you know, in spite of our ability to make Disney movies.
And climate change.
Climate change is nothing new. Do you know when photosynthesis evolved, these new organisms that were suddenly able to take sunlight and make sugar and free oxygen out of it, they completely destroyed the environment in which they lived. Free oxygen was deadly poison to them. Yeah. So we're not the first group of organisms that have become successful and then ruined our own home. And we probably won't be the last. Is this a massive extinction like the Cretaceous extinction or the Permian extinction or the Precambrian extinction? Well, none of us will live long enough probably to find out, but I don't know. If you lose panda bears and, Siberian tigers, these are animals that may or may not in any way be fossilized because they're really rare, right? I don't know. It's hard to say, but it's a fascinating world to live in.
Yeah.
I want to do one more thing before we go. Okay. And then you can ask more questions. I want you guys to think about a mystery. So we're going now up to the Mount Stephen trilobite beds, which will make this look like nothing at all. It is an incredibly dense and wonderful fossil site. In my hand I have two Olenoides trilobites, but they look different, don't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
Why do you think they look different, Santiago?
Because of evolution.
Could be. What they are is the same species, slightly different ages. But this guy has a shell on the outside. He's like a crustacean, like a crab or a lobster. How do crabs and lobsters grow? Well, they molt. They lose their shell, like many arthropods. The fact is that when a trilobite wants to molt or grow or lose its shell, you see this line on the front?
Yeah.
By its eye? Yeah. That's called the facial suture, and it's a line of weakness. When it gets too tight inside its shell and it's time to make a new one, these parts pop off. You see what's happened here?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The cheeks have detached. And then the animal literally crawls out the front of its face. And when it comes out, it's all soft and squishy. And it takes several hours for it to mineralize a new shell on its top to protect itself. This is a time for a trilobite of great vulnerability. This guy, on the other hand, same species, roughly the same size, is just a dead trilobite. Discarded shell, dead trilobite. Now, when we get up there, we're going to find about 30 of these for every one of these. And they're going to be in huge abundance. Like your dad saw, fossils on every level in these rocks, right? On both sides of the rocks, and probably if you split the rock open, there would be more in the middle. Tons and tons and tons of them. About 20 or 30 of these for every one of these. The other thing we find up here are Anomalocaris claws. This is not the whole animal. This is simply the gray part on those things at the top. You see that circular part on the bottom? That's its mouth. It's a mouth that opens and closes like the aperture of a camera.
Jordan.
And it turns out it's incredibly weak. This kind of mouth cannot possibly crunch a trilobite shell. And yet trilobites are its favorite food. It has two ways of eating its favorite food. It can try and rip the shell off with its claws or its grasping claws.
Pincers.
Yeah, I like that word. Or it can do what? Go ahead.
Wait for the trilobite to mold its shell.
Yes! That's absolutely 100% right. It could wait for the trilobite to molt, and then it just suckers it up because it's not crunchy at all. Well, question is, the mystery is, what the heck is going on here? Paint me a picture. This is something that paleontologists have a lot of fun with. We've already identified the specimens. Now tell me something about how they lived. What's going on here? We have 30 discarded shells for every single dead trilobite, and we've got lots of Anomalocaris claws. How can you imagine 510 million years ago that these guys were living and dying?
Reproduction?
Yeah, of course. But what specifically to this spot? Is it a trilobite comic-con? Comic convention and they all gathered together and then they were just killed?
No.
30 discarded trilobite shells for every dead trilobite and a bunch of these. What I like to picture, and it might not be right, but no one's argued with me in 28 years about it. What I like to imagine is that this is an area maybe where there's rock overhangs, like this thing that Rosie's sitting on right now. Maybe it's just a calm pool where they all gather in huge numbers like the wildebeest on the savanna of Africa. But I think this is a place where they go to molt because they know that they're vulnerable to predation, that they might get eaten when they molt. So they look for shelter or they gather together in huge numbers. And of course, the predator, if this is not life size, right?
Much
The
bigger.
actual predator is 1.5 meters long.
Wow.
Jordan.
So these guys come where the trilobites are molting because there's nothing they like better than a soft pink trilobite that they can suck up. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of cool to imagine that, isn't it?
So, and the other thing is, this side, like if you go back in time, the location of this side, it was actually on the equator, right?
About 20 degrees north latitude. Close enough.
How amazing that this was there and in time moved here.
And it was at the bottom of the sea. And now we're at, I did all this lecture and then a woman asked me once, I'm clear on everything, but it's one thing I don't get. How did these creatures crawl out of the sea and wedge themselves in the side of a mountain? And I'm like, I failed, right? I just failed. Somehow I failed. The reason they get up in the mountain is because at the time, Canada and North America ends at the Alberta border. And everything west of, say, the Trench, the Columbia sort of Golden down to Cranbrook, everything west of that is what we call an exotic terrain. It's all come in from the ocean and crashed in. And as it's done that, it's pushed these mountains up. So it lifted them up from the bottom of the sea up into the air. And if they hadn't been, we would never have found them. And if we'd come 1,000 years later, they probably would all be gone. Do you have a question? Go ahead, ask me anything.
How, like, when they die,
Mm-hmm.
like, when they die and it's a new year, do, like, people just start
So
finding
to be
them
careful they don't not broke anything.
research them?
All of these creatures, every single one of these creatures died over 500 million years ago. They are so incredibly old. Dinosaurs died 100 million years ago, more or less.
How can you describe paleontology, like in a few words? What is the science of what?
The study of ancient life.
Ancient life. And it's also related, right? It goes hand with archaeology and geology and
Right.
biology, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, paleontology in many universities isn't a department in and of itself. It's going to be either in biology or geology or both, right? Archaeology is the study of human artifacts, not human bones. The study of human bones is physical anthropology, right? But there's no difference between physical anthropology and paleontology, except they probably have their own building.
Yeah.
Because again, that goes back to this idea that I think modern science would discount, but that humans are special. When you invent geology, when you invent paleontology in the in the 18th or 19th centuries, humans are seen as, and I suppose it's partially religious, humans are seen as having special qualities, as being somehow separate from the animal kingdom. I think that most scientists today would say we're no different from a hippopotamus, except we look different, right? But that was not the case even 50 years ago. And maybe that's because of religion, maybe because the church told us that only humans have a soul, right? The kid goes and asks the priest, oh, my dog died, will it go to heaven? And the priest goes, no, your dog ain't going to heaven because it doesn't have a soul, because it's not a human. I think science would reject that idea right now and say that we are probably a rather insignificant side branch on